The year was early 2000 and something, and almost the whole of my dad's side of the family decided to take a trip together to Cherokee, North Carolina. One of his other brothers found a bunch of cabins for rent, all clustered on the side of one of the many Smoky Mountains, and we all decided to get them so we could be close and spend some time together, unlike we ever really had before. Or since. We called it Lowie Mountain for the long weekend. On one of the last nights, Poppy made a big deal about how he wanted us all to get together in Brett's cabin for a special surprise. The adults knew what it was. Us 6 kids didn't. We were told to sit on the floor and wait while Poppy brought out his slide projector, prepared with snapshots placed in his special order. He wanted to show everyone photos of the family trips to Cherokee from my dad's childhood. Before then, I really had no idea they even went on those trips. The slide projector caught my attention. I'd never heard anything like it before. The wood paneling, the distinct click-clack of a changing slide, the heat from the bulb, and the whir of the fan were all so new to me. Like elder shaman in caves thousands of years since telling stories of heroes long ago and battles hard fought, my grandfather told us about ourselves. Images slid across a textured white wall, stimulating our imaginations, like the small cave children watching hand-painted figures dance across rock as fire crackled and light flickered. Though it was impossible, those kids felt deep down that maybe the charcoal drawings on the wall really were moving, or that the translucent slides the size of a living room may actually take them back to some age long before their time. It was that projector, those photos, that showed me that going to North Carolina for fall trips, or Disney with your mom as a kid, or air shows with your dad was just what a Lowie does. It told me about my family's past, my heritage, my inheritance, what I needed to do when I had my own kids. I learned that I, too, was obligated to take them to the old sugar mill, the waterfall that takes 30 minutes to hike to, and the Cherokee Casino where they play in the game room while I gamble amongst the thick cigarette smoke. That was the first and last time that Poppy ever showed me his slides, at least in that context, so let me rephrase it then. It was the only time Poppy ever presented his slides to me. I knew of them before, more as an entry. They were not viewable on my Video Now or Game Boy SP, so there was no reason to spend any time on them. After the presentation, though, I became obsessed with his photographs, understanding how important they were. It was through that experience that I learned what would be passed on to us kids, what Poppy wanted us to see. But, as I quickly found out, there was still so much that he didn't want us to see. Some of the slides from Vietnam, the black and white photos in the brown box, the letters. When your family tells you about yourself, about them, there's so much that you start to connect with. You naturally think to yourself, oh, Poppy has a lead foot, that must be where I get it from. Or, wow, Meemaw always has a coffee in her hand, that must be why I'm addicted to Starbucks. We treat these things as our inheritance, almost as if our genetics make us compulsively sip caffeine or to speed, even when we aren't in a hurry. We learn of the things we do because it's just what a Lowie does. But what of the things we don't talk about? What about the things we're collectively ashamed of? What about the things we throw in cardboard boxes and stack at the bottom of a tall pillar of boxes in a closet that will certainly bring water damage to all its contents? How do these things get passed on? How do they become a part of ourselves? The stories may not get told, but the slides still sit in their boxes. The letters, coffee-stained and brittle, still wait to be read once more. The older I became, the more I learned about my grandfather's struggles. That's probably the best way to put it. His struggles? His alcoholism, his battle with mental illness, his abusive and venomous words, his pride, and his unending commitment to always being a man. The more I learn, the more I think to myself, how much of this have I inherited? Is that why my tongue seems to be the only thing that gets me in trouble? Is that why my dad was always obsessed with making sure I acted like a man in every single teachable situation growing up? Is that why it seems like so many people in my family struggle with substance abuse? How did I inherit these things? Do these struggles get passed on in memory only? In practice? Did they run through his blood, and do they now run through mine? Maybe they're just part of the deal when you accept the slides as your own. There are gaps. in the stories we tell ourselves and each other. These gaps are filled only by the imagination. Like a monster surely hiding under the bed of every 5-year-old, these dark places present us with potent visions of terror, but also intrigue. These gaps are passed down, and the stories we tell ourselves gain a life of their own, separate from the truth. Why else would I be convinced that Poppy was in the CIA after Nam and not on a tuna fishing boat avoiding his family? What else was I allowed to inherit from him? Just the good? Just the slides of smiles in North Carolina or cannonballs into their above-ground pool? Or is it also my responsibility to inherit the letters, the black and white photos, the tenuous relationship with drinking? Once my grandparents had moved to Georgia, and the trip to North Carolina was nothing more than a memory, Poppy got interested in digitizing his slides, but he didn't focus on the ones of the family. He focused on the ones he never showed us, the ones from Vietnam. He bought a scanner, hoping to preserve them, but soon became too ill. He only had the ability to eat, watch TV, and smoke on the porch, making sure to keep the O2 in his nasal cannula held in one hand away from the lit cigarette in his other. Eventually, he told my grandmother to throw the slides out and yelled at her when she wouldn't, but he never did it himself either. When I was a kid sitting in a cabin in early 2000 and something, I thought the projector was a relic, a piece of technology so useless and outdated that only old men who wanted to relive their pasts would hold on to them. It was neat, but it couldn't beat digital cameras or later cell phones, and frankly, it still really can't. But that doesn't matter. When my grandfather passed away, I made it a priority to get his projector. I didn't want it just because it was his, but because it was representative of one of the few times he was sentimental. He spoke. He wanted to share with everyone. My cousins and I all remember the experience, and although we may not remember the photos or the stories that went along with them, we can't forget the time that our quiet, demure grandfather opened up to us. The technology was limiting, and that doesn't make much sense to an audience today, but it made sense to that situation. It made sense to my grandfather. It was the way he wanted to tell the stories he needed to tell. It has its limitations, but those are its strengths. It forces people to gather in person, to speak to one another, to ask questions. You become less of a voyeur casually scrolling on your phone and peeking into other people's lives. Instead, you become a part of the conversation. Different members of the audience often chime in with things like, "Oh, do you remember?" or "Nah, it happened like this." You don't just experience seeing the photos, but you remember seeing the photos, even if you don't remember their contents. When all else is gone, that's what you tie yourself to. That experience. That strange, once-in-a-lifetime experience of your grandfather speaking about something more than just the weather or a meal. You can go back to the photos, but you can never go back to the cabin and relive those experiences, so you better hold on to them. Just like you can never go back to Vietnam, but you know that even if the photos are gone, you can't forget, so why throw them out? Though you never get his presentation again, that doesn't matter, because you know exactly what he wanted you to remember, why he wanted you to remember it, why it was special to him, and now why it's special for you. You get a glimpse not at just the trips your family went on long ago, but of the things he wanted to remember, of the person he might have been before he took the photos that he didn't show you. Years later, when you're sitting with your parents and grandmother in your childhood home that your parents have since moved out of, you can be the one to press the button, causing the distinctive click-clack. You can ask why someone was wearing a stupid shirt or why Meemaw always seemed to have curlers in her hair, even when camping. Your grandfather might not have ever given you much, but he gave you this. He let you be the one to give the presentation. The moment you realize this is transcendent. Hello, and thank you for listening to the introductory episode of Dearest Suzie, a podcast and photo series. I'm Alexander Lowie, an anthropologist and the youngest grandchild of William P. Lowie, a U.S. Army helicopter pilot who served during the Vietnam War in 1964 and 1965. Though he went by Bill, we called him Poppy. He passed away in 2012 after a long struggle with respiratory issues. So what is Dearest Suzie? It's a multimedia presentation of Bill Lowie's archive from the Vietnam War, structured in an On This Day in History format. As we near the 60th anniversary of the war's official start, I'll be sharing entries from his war diary and letters posted to the internet on the same days he wrote them. Each entry will be paired with a photograph he took during his time there. He wrote over 100 letters and took more than 500 photos during his deployment. Each post will feature a reading of his writing, a photo, and often a reflection from me or a bit of history to provide some context about his place in the war. Who is Suzie? Suzie is my grandmother, Susan, who we all affectionately refer to as Meemaw. She's the reason this project exists, and has encouraged me to tell Poppy's story. When she handed me the stack of his letters, I'd read the first one out loud, and her only response was, "I don't even remember him calling me Suzie." That's when I realized there was much more to uncover. It was a moment that captured the passage of time and memory, showing how even the most personal of histories can hold surprises. We can forget, but we can also rediscover. What do I want to do with this project? Well, I don't just want to tell you about history or simply present you with an archive. I want to share the story of discovery that I experienced while working through these materials. If I do my job well, you may soon find that the discoveries go deeper than just learning about my grandfather's service in Vietnam. It is my intention that through the telling of my experiences, you, the listener, will feel encouraged to share. Perhaps you're a part of my generation, and you knew a family member did something significant, and you've never asked questions about it. Hopefully, you'll be curious enough to now. Or maybe you yourself served, and though painful, you realize you have stories that can be passed down, which may help your family and friends better understand themselves. Through the expression of that pain, maybe you can find places to heal. I'm proud to call myself an American, and even prouder to be a Lowie, for better or worse. After all, the stories, the letters, the photos, the genes, and the name are all things people have given me, just for being me. Who am I to deny the generosity of a gift? I hope I've piqued your interest, and that you'll join me between now and August 2025 as I share these letters and the few diary entries from the past, exactly 60 years after they were written. Please consider following Dearest Suzie on your preferred podcast platform, as well as YouTube, X, and Instagram, where I'll post additional photos as they relate to the letters. You'll find the links for these things in the description below. Also, please feel free to email me at dearestsuziepodcast@gmail.com if you have anything you'd like to say. I'd love to hear your stories as well. Thank you for listening, and God bless.